You are listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis, Norman Richmond. And joining us on the line is Dr. Gerald Horne. And Dr. Gerald Horne has a brand spanking new book out called I Dare Say. Like this is Gerald Horne Reader. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But we have a lot of burning issues on the plate. And first of all, I'd like to ask you, Dr. Horne, how are you feeling today?
Oh, it's all good. What about you and yours?
Oh, it's fine. It's good for me. Melinda has to speak for herself.
I'm doing well. I made it home, so I'm glad to be here.
So I guess we lost Sister Melba Liston. Melba Liston was a great pianist, trombone player, and she was born, I think, Kansas City, and she grew up in Los Angeles, California, and she went to Belmont High School. Belmont is a little bit outside of Los Angeles, and one of my first cousins, Ethel Malone, went to Belmont, but also the great Anthony Quinn. I think Anthony Quinn's Mexican American. He went to Belmont. Also, Mr. Mr. Jack Webb from Dragnet, the TV show. A lot of people listening don't know what I'm even talking about. I'm dating myself, but a great TV show, Dragnet, and the great humorist Mart Saul also went to Belmont High School, and also Melba went to Jamaica. She put the school together, school of music there. She also worked with Motown Records. She was and she did the soundtrack for Smile Orange, that great Jamaican film, which many people in the audience have viewed that particular film. And if you haven't, I would like for you to go to I think it's on YouTube. Smile Orange. It was put together by the great filmmaker Trevor Rohn from Jamaica. And I'm gonna let you get started, Brother Horne.
Well, interestingly enough, I met the great late Melba Liston some decades ago. I might have been in my 20s, to give you an idea of how long ago was it. This was in New York City. I recall that she was in a wheelchair then. I don't recall the circumstances that led to that, nor do I recall how I wound up. Sorry?
She had a stroke.
I see. Nor do I recall how I wound up in her apartment, which, as I recall, was on Riverside Drive in Manhattan. But in any case, she is being missed. Her creations, her playing, her insight.
And a lot of some of the greatest Jamaican music players. I'm having a senior moment. There's a brother that played. He's on all of Bob Marley's. Big brother plays alto and tenor saxophone. Cedric Brooks was someone will call, could email me and tell me who am I talking about. It might be Cedric Brooks, but she taught a lot of the greatest reggae artists. They came under her tutelage, and she, like I say, she did some work with Motown as well.
Oh, okay, Motown. I know. Well, as you mentioned, Randy Weston, of course, was one of her musical companions, so to speak.
Oh yeah. That Randy. They did Uhuru Africa. The whole. She arranged that album, which is that album was banned by the South African government. I think it came out in 1961, and Randy had everybody on that album. African people. I think Olatunji out of Nigeria. He had a lot of Afro-Cubans. I don't know if I don't think Chamo Pozo was on it, but that was like a was like a Pan-African orchestra, if I recall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. Speaking of Pan-Africanism, I think I can't recall if we discussed what befell the African People's Socialist Party in the past 7 or 8 days, but in any case, I've been talking about it quite a bit. I just got an email from a reporter from the French publication Le Figaro who wants to talk to me about this case. And for those who may not be familiar, they're being accused and have been indicted for supposedly collaborating and conspiring with certain Russians to supposedly sow discord during the elections in the United States of America. There are those of us who suggest that this has very curious echoes of past persecutions of those like Paul Robeson, those like W.E.B. Du Bois, who you may recall in 1951 was indicted for being the part of an alleged collaboration with Moscow to destroy nuclear weapons. That supposedly was a Moscow-inspired idea. And it's going to be quite a struggle to ensure that these defendants are able to escape the crushing blow of the law. But preliminarily, I would say that the chances for that happening are good.
I heard you on an interview on a radio station. You were calling for the NAACP's legal team to get behind the African People's Socialist Party because their misdeeds. They had a lot to do. I know you've talked about and written extensively how the NAACP made the deal where they basically sold us out. They sold Africa, India, China. Well, they sold the banned-down world out in order to, I guess, to curry favor to exist, really. Am I correct in saying that?
I'm afraid so. And we're still suffering from that ill-fated decision. That is to say, as I pointed out more than once, the world is going through a major shift right now with the rise of China and their de facto alliance with Russia, and the fact that France, if you listen to the words of President Macron at least, are rather leery of tailing after U.S. imperialism with regard to the conflict with China, at least. They're on board with the conflict with Russia. And yet, with all of these changes taking place in the world that have significance for the continued existence of humanity, and not to mention the fate of U.S. imperialism, many Black American intellectuals and organizations and leaders are missing in action. They have little or nothing to say. And it's an abdication of responsibility. And it's not just them. I think I mentioned last week that there are certain left-wing news sources in this country which have been pro the U.S. escapade in Ukraine, but ever since the Putin-Xi summit, followed by the Macron-Xi summit, followed by the Lula of Brazil Xi summit, this left-wing source has really almost stopped talking about international affairs. I guess it's either a split in their ranks and they can't come to a decision as to what line to take, or they just feel totally flummoxed and frustrated and have thrown up their hands and saying, we just can't deal with the world. It's just too complicated.
Well, I kind of find that what you're saying is true because I won't mention any names, but there's a great, an alleged Pan-Africanist group, not a group, but they have let me put it there, Pan-African thing. They have not mentioned, they mentioned the Ukraine, but they haven't mentioned the arrest of Omali Yeshitela and the comrades, but that might be because of sectarianism. And I thought that, when we were under attack we put our petty differences together and come together. But I'm guess I'm kind of wishy-washy. I'm not going to mention any names, but people know what I'm talking about. They haven't mentioned anything about the arrest of the African People's Socialist Party. I'm very disappointed.
Well, I think that there's more disappointment around the corner because we know that at times of crisis, the saying usually goes, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. But in this country, when the going gets tough, folks hide under their beds, basically, or hide under their desks.
What the brother said, they doing sometimes they out rap, but when it comes down, they outrun the road runner.
Right. But, what's interesting, I read the Wall Street Journal, and ever since President Xi made that statement when he was leaving Moscow a few weeks ago, the statement being that there are changes afoot in the world, the likes of which we have not seen for a century, and we, he said, speaking to Putin, are driving these changes. Now, that's a paraphrase. The Wall Street Journal has repeated that quote numerous times in the last few weeks. And it's almost like they're using it to psych up their conservative readers to get ready for a bare-knuckled confrontation with the People's Republic of China and a confrontation with Russia simultaneously. And as I might have mentioned before, that's a fool's errand that can only end in tears. And what's even more ironic is that the right wing in this country, they're willing to cut a deal with Moscow so that they can just go after China, whereas the ruling Democrats are seemingly trying to confront both, which sounds to me like a suicide pact. But given the aforementioned fact that the Black community is missing in action with regard to international affairs, that gives the right wing of the Democratic Party more leeway to get involved in these quagmires. And there's another factor too, and this bespeaks how so many of our friends on the left don't understand the terrain on which they're struggling. And that is that the Republican Party controls a preponderance of the Euro-American vote across class lines. Now, if you look at certain parts of the internet, whenever I say that, you have certain so-called white leftists who say, oh, the 75 million who voted for Trump, they're petty bourgeois. So they can't come to grips with the fact that there is a working class base for the right wing. I'm sorry, that's just a reality. They would just want to reduce it to the ruling class, the Fortune 500, and certain shopkeepers. But if you don't have an adequate analysis of the forces on the ground, it's like going into battle. Like they've gone into battle with Russia, underestimating Russia, not having an understanding of the impact of sanctions, and they sanctioned Russia and wound up sanctioning themselves. And so you have the U.S. left. They don't want to admit that there might be some Euro-American working class support for Trump. And so therefore they come up with inadequate analyses and adequate prescriptions. And excuse my sounding like a broken record, but it all goes back to their failure to acknowledge the indigenous question, the question of indigenous dispossession, which many of these people act like never took place, which leads us into a consideration of settler colonialism, a phrase that is conspicuously missing from their vocabularies. And settler colonialism leads us to a consideration of class collaboration, which helps to explain the persistence and the pervasiveness of right-wing politics across class lines amongst Euro-Americans. And then, what gets me about the United States, this is a big country, 330 million people, borders from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Canada, by way of contrast, is 35 million. And
yep.
So you talk to these people in places like Connecticut, and which is, okay, fine. So, Connecticut is more progressive than certain parts of the South. But I live here in Texas. Texas, they're talking about shutting down libraries because they don't like the books that are in the libraries. In Texas, regularly, countless people die along the border. And Texas and the South generally, the Republicans are supported by Euro-Americans across class lines 8-2 and 9-1. Some of these people who live in New York and the Northeast, they're blissfully unaware of these basic realities, which is going to come back to bite them, because these people in the South, they don't necessarily accept electoral results. I hope that they realize that. These people in the South have shown that they're willing to conduct a civil war. I hope they realize that. And they're more than willing to upset the status quo in Connecticut, for example. But anyway, I'm looking right now. I have in my hand my passport. I'm willing and ready to make a quick exit.
You're listening to Diasporic music. I'm laughing because what did they say? I was smoking. I'm laughing to keep from crying. But I have one more question about this issue, and then I want to turn it over to Melinda. How has CARICOM in the Caribbean countries, the English-speaking Caribbean countries, how have they responded to this question that we're talking about?
Well, for the most part, CARICOM in the global South is consistent with Mexico and Africa and Brazil in terms of not going along with the sanctions campaign against Moscow. Now, P.J. Patterson, the former Jamaican prime minister, he spoke in Baltimore just the other day. I have not perused his remarks, but I know that he was invited to speak by a number of Black Americans who are in favor of the U.S. position in the Ukraine. And so it seems to me that put Mr. Patterson in a ticklish position. He could either reflect the consensus amongst the so-called global South, or he could avoid being in the appearance of insulting or contradicting his host. So I don't know what position he took.
Okay, but P.J. Patterson was part of a CLRJ study group, I think, in London many years ago. P.J. Patterson. Well, I'll turn it over to Melinda.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering about G ghosting Biden right now.
Or Biden ghosting PJ, one or the other.
Yeah.
What for the people that don't know what you guys are talking about? What is the issue?
Well, he's not returning. He's not returning Biden's calls at all.
Oh, I was confused. I thought you're talking about my China. I thought you were still talking about PJ. You're talking China. Yeah. Okay. You're listening to Diasporic music on Black Power 96. You have some more questions, I know, Melinda.
Well, and then there's also, do you want to talk about Russian foreign minister in Brazil, Cuba, and Venezuela?
Yeah, it's very important, particularly Cuba, because Cuba is going through some rather difficult straits right now. And I was very pleased to see that Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, was there this week. And I trust that will mean a lifeline tossed to Havana. You mentioned the fact that President Xi is not returning the phone calls of Mr. Biden. And what I would like to see next along that lines is President Xi going to Havana to personally extend a lifeline to the leaders of Cuba, which would be a slap in the face of U.S. imperialism and is long overdue. And I should also mention that just this week, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, gave this address at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, D.C. Now, the headline of the speech was seemingly positive in the sense that she said that the United States should not pursue decoupling from the Chinese economy, that it would be disastrous for both. What she really meant was that it would be disastrous for U.S. imperialism. And after seeing that headline, I went on a radio program and suggested that this was a step forward in terms of realism by the U.S. ruling elite. But if you dig a little bit deeper with regard to that speech, it's much more troubling, because as ever, what Janet Yellen and the class she represents is suggesting is that if China wants to avoid decoupling, it should basically surrender to U.S. imperialism, which obviously is not going to happen. And this is part of this hawkishness that is so endemic in Washington right now. And as I have suggested, it inevitably will end in tears.
You're listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96. Could you talk about your latest work, I Dare Say, the Gerald Horne Reader? And first of all, the publisher, could you talk about the book and the publisher? I've never heard of the publisher.
It's OR Books out of New York City. Actually, the book is just being advertised now. It won't be out for a few months. It's basically a collection. It's like if one of your homeboys, Drake of the Weeknd, did a greatest hits album.
Right.
You know, I dug into the closet and dragged out a collection of articles and essays I've written over the years and put it between two covers. And that's what this reader is. And so there is, I have to say that I'm happy to see that this essay I wrote some years ago on the lumpen is included in this collection, because like the Black Panther Party, I have looked at the lumpen. I don't come out with the same conclusion that the Black Panther Party did. I do a historical excavation and a global excavation of the lumpen's role and struggles, be it in North America or worldwide. And I recommend that article in particular to your audience. But with regard to a book that'll be out in the next few days, that's the book on Washington, D.C., Revolting Capital, Racism and Radicalism in Washington, D.C., 1900 to 2000. There's a book signing on June 3rd in Washington, D.C., in the Adams Morgan neighborhood of Washington, 1640 Columbia Road, Northwest, Washington, D.C., June 3rd, 6 p.m. Be there or be square. And then another one in Brooklyn, New York on Juneteenth, June 19th in the afternoon at Sisters Place in Bedford-Stuyvesant in the People's Republic of Brooklyn. Be there or be square.
Well, let me say that on this lumping question, I think that the great Walter Anthony Rodney basically said that a lot of our friends on the left, as you like to say, their position, the position of the lumpen in Africa should be looked upon different as the lumpen in Oakland or the lumpen in Los Angeles. He talked about that. I'm going to go back and read that, and I like to talk. Maybe we could not build a whole show, but I like to get your thoughts on that, because and not all of the Panthers took that position on the lumpen, because Bobby Seale was a working class guy, or is a working class guy, and he wasn't that favorable of the lumpen.
Well, first of all, it's clear that a lot of the Black Panther leaders were actually not lumpen. They just tended to trumpet the lumpen ideologically. Second of all, a distinction has to be drawn between the Reserve Army of Labor, the Black unemployed, and the lumpen. That is to say, drug dealers, pimps, the people who are trumpeted in a lot of contemporary music, for example. Because one of the things that drove me to this study was the proliferation of lumpen themes in music, and also the valorizing of the term pimp, for example, which is redolent even today with regard to certain corners of our hip hop community. And this valorizing of the term pimp, I don't think that the folks who are doing that have really thought too deeply about what they're valorizing. At least I hope that they haven't. I hope that they didn't think deeply and then decided it was okay to big up the pimps.
But I know the Los Angeles Black Panther Party, like the leadership, Al Prentice, Bunchy Carter, his mother was, his father, Elmore, Bunchy's daddy's father's name was Elmore. He passed away, but Miss Carter was definitely working class. I mean, and most of the Panthers that I knew, my background is working class. My father and grandfather worked at R.H. Osbrink, the plant where they were sand testers, and they made planes for airplanes during the war situation, because of the war situation. And when I was growing up, majority of us came out of working class families.
Well, same here. You know, my father was a member of the Teamsters, which used to bill itself as the largest union in the capitalist world. And
right.
Unsurprisingly, in the United States, that union at the highest levels was dominated by organized crime, which helped to cheat my father out of a well-deserved pension after he had worked for decades. It basically went to Las Vegas gangsters, his pension and the money of other Teamsters, which is one of the reasons why it was difficult for me to be that sanguine or that positive about gangsters, since they cheated my father out of his pension. But even setting aside that personal question, once again, I don't think that folks really did an analysis. Well, this is very typical of the United States. People oftentimes go into battle without doing an analysis. I mean, U.S. imperialism just did that in Ukraine. They obviously underestimated Russia. They underestimated the import and the impact of a Russia-China alliance. And now they're in deep doo-doo and or flailing around hysterically and trying to get out of this crisis, this polycrisis, to use the current term, by threatening to blow up the world, by launching World War III. And so perhaps I should not be too critical of some of our Black friends and comrades who may not have done an adequate analysis, since that seems to be endemic in U.S. culture.
We only have a few minutes left. I want to get you to talk about the Tunisian, Tunisia has arrested the one of the opposition leaders, one, and two, there's a war, a situation in Sudan where factions of the army are battling one another. Could you deal with those two?
Well, the Sudan's crisis is obviously boiling over. That is to say that there is a conflict between the military and a wing of the military, the so-called Rapid Support Forces. The latter is backed by United Arab Emirates, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, et al. The military is being backed by Egypt, and that is leading to a breakdown of society. I think it's fair to say that U.S. imperialism is hysterical. And let me make a correction. I think last week, or perhaps on another show, I suggested that the military is negotiating with Moscow to establish Russian facilities in Port Sudan. I should have said Port Sudan. I think I might have said Port Said. I got the two mixed up. Port Said, of course, is in Egypt. But in any case, it's reflective of the fact that there's a new Cold War that's descended on the African continent. And right now, Sudan is the epicenter to a degree of this new Cold War. And we need to really demand of U.S. imperialism hands off Sudan. U.S. imperialism has enough problems at home to keep it busy for decades to come without seeking to shape the internal situation in Sudan. And of course, neighboring Tunisia, the leader, Mr. Said, has been in the headlines because he's charging that the so-called sub-Saharan Africans who are flooding into Tunis, the capital, are part of a plot to engage in a certain kind of reconfiguration of the domestic demographics of Tunisia. And as I said on another program, excuse me for reflecting on what I've said on other programs, but these North Africans have a very anomalous position in U.S. society. Many of them are constructed as, quote, white, unquote. The host of the Today Show, for example, which is one of the most popular TV shows in the United States, broadcast out of New York on a commercial network, is Egyptian, but I don't think that that's recognized because she's melanin deficient. And I think that, and I'm afraid to say that this afflicts not only some of the this whiteness psychosis, afflicts some of the folks in North Africa, particularly in Tunisia. I think it afflicts even some of the Palestinian friends who, if they're melanin deficient, can pass for, quote, white, unquote, and many of them do. As I might have said before, one Palestinian intellectual objected strenuously and stridently when I referred to the United States as a settler colonial society. I mean, I still can't get over that.
Mm-hmm. Fear, what is it? Fear of a Black Planet, huh?
I guess so. So I think we're going overtime, Norman, Melinda.
I think
Lisa.
we have.
Yeah, I think we are.
So let's let it. We have to cut it then.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. We did go overtime. So next week we'll be back in the driver's seat, sir.
Right on.
And I'd like to thank Lisa Watson for technical genius as usual, and thank you, Melinda. Any final comments?